Okay, good evening, everyone. This feels very much like a home crowd, very familiar faces in many cases, for a very long time. So let me extend all of you a very warm welcome to this talk by Ambassador Talmiz Ahmed, co-sponsored, actually jointly organized by the Center for Policy Research and the India International Center, in which basically the CPR has done the organization and the IIC is our host for the evening. The subject of the talk is West Asia after Bashar Assad, regional and global ramifications. At the time that we conceived of this talk, it was really in the post-Assad phase. As we know, in the last 2 days, something else has in fact hijacked the news or taken over the news, good news in fact, which is the ceasefire that has come into effect yesterday between the Hamas and Israel. So quite naturally, that is a subject that we cannot ignore. And I don't think we have too many people better than Ambassador Talmiz Ahmed to talk on the entire range of subjects dealing with West Asia, particularly post the Gaza war. Ambassador Talmiz Ahmed hardly needs any introduction to any of you. Amongst his many, many sort of qualifications and achievements, I think he's been a two-time ambassador to Saudi Arabia, a very rare achievement, and also ambassador to Oman and UAE. And post his retirement, of course, he's been a very prolific writer, commentator, very frequent appearances on television and on videos and on sort of talk shows. Just, I think, a couple of days back, he was featured in Karan Thapar's The Interview for The Wire on the ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas. And I think what has been diplomacy's loss has been really scholarship's gain, because he is also the Ram Sathe Chair for International Relations at the Symbiosis International University, Pune. And I'm sure, you will see in the course of this lecture that he has all the makings of a great academic, amongst other things. So I'm not really going to say too much about Syria. I think all of you must be very well informed. But one of the reasons why we thought of anchoring this talk around Syria is that Syria has always been considered in some ways a keystone of the regional architecture of West Asia. And particularly when I was serving there, it used to be often said that if conflicts in West Asia reach finally Syria, which had been controlled with a fairly heavy hand by Bashar's father first, Hafiz al-Assad, and then by Bashar, then perhaps its regional ramifications are hard to predict. And in fact, part of the motive behind this talk is to try and grapple with the possible ramifications of the change, the really sort of, I would say, epic change in Syria, which had been firmly under the Assads for the last, maybe 60, 70 years. I may be wrong on the decades. 50 years. And I don't know, many of you may remember that Bashar Assad also had a state visit to India in 2015, if I'm not wrong. And that was the period actually that corresponded to Bashar's, relative, I would say there was an easing of the kind of repression that the Assad regime in generally had been associated with it. It was a period of a degree of reform and opening. In fact, I remember people used to tell me that it was unbelievable that we can talk like this. Maybe a few years back you couldn't even do that. But quite apart from that, another major issue of concern to the international community is what replaces Assad. Are we replacing a secular dictator who managed to hold the peace and protect minorities in Syria all these years in some way? Are we replacing them with a kind of Islamist theocracy or another version of a dictatorship? The HTS has captured a lot of news space, but it's not the only militant organization in town. The capacity of Ahmed al-Shara and others to be able to manage and control all these disparate organizations spread out all over the region, particularly in the east and in the south is an open question. I think the jostling is still going on. Some of the worst fears about excesses, about attacks on minorities, retributive actions have not yet apparently come into effect. Turkey has occupied large swaths of territory in northern Syria. Israel has expanded its control in the Golan Heights, beyond the Golan Heights, or at least further along the Golan Heights. And we are also, it's an open question how a Sunni fundamentalist or Sunni Islamist regime in Syria is going to affect the rest of the Gulf and West Asian, Middle Eastern Islamic world. Because for all its threats, so far the Muslim Brotherhood or the Islamist organizations haven't really got a grip of power on power in almost any of the major Islamic states in that region, not counting for the moment the conservative emirates and kingdoms that are in that region. So what are the chances of that also working? So I think to take you all through this, I would leave the rest of the evening as much as possible for Ambassador Talmiz Ahmed to take us around. And then, of course, we will have a session in which we will take some question and answers, which perhaps I will lead with. And let me also mention that this is one among a series of talks that the Center for Policy Research has been organizing of late. We had a talk by the noted historian, US historian Stephen Kotkin, just about a month back at this very place. A few days back, we had a talk by a US scholar on Myanmar at the CPR. Similarly, we had another scholar on Nepal just a few days back. And of course, this is Ambassador Talmiz. So I think without further ado, Ambassador Talmiz, the floor is yours.
Which is the one that we press?
Sorry, down.
This one?
Just a minute. I'll just this over here. This one.
This one.
This one. Down there.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thank you, Gautam, for the invitation and for the introduction. And thank you, all of you, for braving the weather and coming here in such large numbers. Deeply appreciated. This is a very difficult period for West Asia. West Asia is constantly in the news, and usually in terms of confrontation and conflict. Very often, the media tends to focus on some of the major events that take place, but rarely link the dots. So as a result, we get the impression of a region that is suffused in violence and seriously complicated, very difficult to understand. And constantly we are asked questions like, why do you have all this violence in West Asia? Why can't they get their act together? Why do they have these extremists, Islamic extremists emerging? I want to address some of these issues, and I would be very happy to respond to questions that you might put to me. West Asia is a complex story. Its story is not written entirely by the people themselves. In fact, they very often have a very small role in shaping their own narrative. They have, of course, experienced domination. Over the last 200 years, it was European domination. And as the Europeans retreated from this region, they ensured that they would never actually disappear. They shaped the borders that you see now in West Asia. Every line that is drawn in West Asia, except the one that separates Iraq from Iran, every line in West Asia has been drawn after the First World War, and several lines in the Arabian Peninsula were then drawn in the Second World War, after the Second World War. Western interventions have remained extremely robust, very frequent, extremely bloody. So that remains the narrative. So very rarely do you get anything called objectivity, because the issues that are raised with regard to West Asian discourse are issues that are extremely resonant in Western interests, and Western stories therefore tend to control the narrative and present it to you in a certain way. As you know, when colonialism withdraws, you get first political independence, then to some extent you get economic independence, or not entirely, but very rarely do you get full intellectual independence. We in the so-called global South have yet to write our own stories convincingly. And we are overwhelmed by the narratives that come out from Western sources. And very often our own scholarship depends on those sources and repeats and regurgitates that material and tells us their stories to us and makes it our own reality. It's very difficult in these circumstances to really shake people out of the comfort zone and give them stories with which they are entirely unfamiliar. Stories that overcome their ignorance and prejudices. But I will make an effort. If you look at the story now, a bird's eye view of the region, so much is happening almost at the same time. You had a ceasefire in Gaza 15 months after the conflict began in October 2023. You recall that period in those early days where you had narratives of 1,500 dead, 2,000 dead, 3,000 dead. And then we were horrified then. And we thought it would all be over quickly. And now as I speak to you, there are 47,000 dead. They have laid down their lives in response to the killing of 1,200 Israelis, 400 of them soldiers. So this is now, there is a ceasefire in Gaza. In Israel, there is, as usual, political turmoil, but there is the master player, Netanyahu, who is a puppet master par excellence, a survivor, totally amoral, totally self-consumed, totally self-centered, but a master puppeteer. In Syria, you have an administration that is run by Islamists, supported entirely by the Americans, who actually interviewed their leader 2 years ago, and he was interviewed on PBS and CNN, and we got the new narrative that this man is moderate, and he means well, he cares for women, and he cares for minorities. You have Turkey, which is looking good. Its president is triumphant. He speaks of the Turkey century. He calls the country is now called Turkey, the Turkey century. That this is 21st century is going to be the century of Turkey. Lebanon has a new president. Very few of us think about Lebanon. But you have a new president after a very long time. It is a country which is totally in a mess, a political mess and an economic mess, and constantly in the news for all the wrong reasons. And then you have Iran. And we every day read about Iran's axis of resistance has been crushed, Iran's defenses have been crushed, and therefore Israel is simply sharpening the knife to launch an assault, and hopefully Donald Trump and Netanyahu will then launch it together and destroy the Islamic Republic and replace it with someone more congenial. And one story which is completely erased from our consciousness is that last year, in March 2024, the Gulf Cooperation Council announced a document. It is known as a Vision for Regional Security. What is significant about this document? It is the first document in 43 years of the GCC story, the first time that the GCC has issued a consensual document on regional security. Astonishing. And it's a document that is very strong, very well drafted, and it has been followed up by the statement of the GCC summit in December, expressing strategic autonomy as far as regional and world affairs are concerned, and a very strong sense of unity. This is an overview. Let's move forward rapidly. Syria. Let me not belabor all the old stories which are now 12, 13, 14 years ago, in the beginning of the Arab Spring uprising. Syria didn't have the massive numbers on the streets, thousands upon thousands coming out in Tunisia and in Egypt, at Tahrir Square, 500,000, and also in Yemen and all these places. It had a few children, teenagers, who wrote some graffiti on the wall saying they are ready for change. And this regime of Bashar al-Assad had been in power for 20 years, for more than 10 years, arrested these kids and gave them the thrashing of their life. This upset their parents, and something which should have been handled with greater responsibility snowballed. And therefore people's resentment, which had been simmering, emerged. And therefore on that occasion you find that people started coming out and started saying that this is not acceptable. You can't beat up kids the way you have done. And whenever you have a regime under pressure, you find various forces, domestic and external, that now come into the scenario, and they start playing their own interests. They start pursuing their own interests. And that is what happened in Syria. Saudi Arabia at that time was under pressure. At that time, Iraq, in 2003, Iraq had fallen, but they felt insecure vis-a-vis Iran. They had built up a strategic partnership with the Egyptians. So the Riyadh-Cairo axis had created a new balance of power in West Asia that gave the Saudis security. But then Hosni Mubarak fell in February 2011, and therefore the balance of power shifted once again in favor of Iran. And it is in this context that the Saudis requested the Americans to bomb. The Americans do something very well, and now the Israelis copy them, bomb a country and kill as many people as possible. They did this in Afghanistan. They did it earlier in Vietnam. Did this in Afghanistan, did it in Iraq, did it in Libya, kill people from the air in the largest possible numbers. And that is what the Saudis very naturally went to their friends and partners and said, that's what you do. Let's effect regime change in Syria. The Americans backed off. Obama wondered what's in it for him. And he told the Saudis, look, every time we've done regime change, the jihadis have won. In the case of Afghanistan, you find the Taliban are all over the place. In the case of Iraq, at the first decade, you had the jihadis had emerged. The Islamic State of Iraq had already been there. And in the case of Libya, hadn't happened at that time. It was going to, but he saw that there were jihadis who were all over the country. So he asked the Saudis, what is your plan for the day after? And the Saudis mumbled and said that, look, we could do this or we could do that or whatever. The Americans were not impressed or convinced and decided not to effect regime change through bombardment. So the Saudis then were forced to support militia that would then become strong enough to overwhelm the Syrian army and finally topple the regime. Why was the Saudis so excited about Syria, regime change in Syria? They thought that if Syria falls, because as you know, Bashar al-Assad is supposed to be a Shia, an Alawite, and therefore only 10% or 15% of the country are Shia, the majority Sunni government will then come into play. So what will happen is, compensating for the loss of Iraq and Egypt, Syria would come into the Arab mainstream and would redress the balance of power that had been lost vis-a-vis Iran. Syria had been an ally of the Iranians since the time of Hafez al-Assad. Their alliance was not based on any Shia affinity. It was entirely based on their being partners in resistance. They were part of the resistance front. But as far as the Saudis were concerned, they were Shia, and they were therefore part of the Shia axis that had emerged in the region, and therefore they thought that we can get Syria back into the mainstream. It will have other benefits as well. You will have the Iranians cut off from their access to the Mediterranean. And if you take away the Bashar Assad government, you would find that the canal, the channel of supplies from Damascus to the Hezbollah in Lebanon would also be snapped, and Lebanon too would shrug off its Shia influence and become part of the Arab mainstream. This was the strategic thinking in Saudi Arabia at that time. But then, how do you implement it? So they supported a large number of militia, Islamic militia, many of them, supported also by Turkey and by Qatar. And the Saudis told the Qatar will play the major role. And they were quite successful. Within a few years, you found that it was really the militia that was doing extremely well. The Iranians therefore brought in Hezbollah cadres from Lebanon to protect the regime. And that is where we were. At that time, you found that the militia were doing quite well. At that time, from Iraq, you found a set sent across from Iraq by at that time Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who sent the chap who is now ruling the country. He sent him in the shape of Jabhat Nusra. Jabhat Nusra is the offshoot of the Islamic State of Iraq. They came into Syria in 2012. They became, by the end of the year, the best fighting force in the country. And therefore, in 2013, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi announced that Jabhat Nusra is actually an offshoot of the Islamic State of Iraq. And now he announced that this Islamic State of Iraq will be renamed Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, and Jabhat Nusra will become part of the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. The leader of the Jabhat Nusra in Syria was Abu Muhammad Jolani, who was of Syrian origin, having lived earlier in Saudi Arabia for many years. He was not enthusiastic about this merger. He wanted his own autonomy. He suggested politely to Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, look, you look after Iraq and I'll look after Syria. In any case, I am not subordinate to you. You have de-linked yourself from Al-Qaeda, but I have not. And I owe allegiance not to you, but to Ayman Zawahiri. Ayman Zawahiri also spoke up from wherever he was and advised Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi to keep off Syria. This did not happen. ISIS forces entered Syria, hammered Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi at that time, then hammered Jabhat Nusra and became a major fighting force. And then, of course, you know the subsequent story of the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria becoming, by 2016 at their peak, they were the size of the United Kingdom, had a population of about 6 to 9 million. This gentleman, Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, slipped off our radar screen. We knew he was camped in Idlib, in the northwestern part of Syria, but he was very low-key. We saw him as the Islamic State took a hammering in 2018, 2019, and was finally destroyed in both Iraq and in Syria. You found him re-emerging. He re-emerged after the Islamic State had been destroyed. His base of support was Idlib in the northwest. This is what you have now. In Idlib, he reinvented himself several times. And over a period of time, you find that he ingratiates himself with the Turks. The Turks had their own agenda in Syria. They had sent their armed forces because, taking advantage of the fighting in the rest of the country, the Kurds in the northeast of the country had set up their own autonomous zone all across the border. And these Syrian Kurds were actually very close to the Turkish Kurds, indeed provided them with sanctuary and also gave them sanctuary as well as training. And therefore the Turks organized 4 major military interventions into Syria and captured territories to prevent the contiguity of the Kurdish territories. So the Kurds were at that time marginalized. The Turks had come in. In order to manage affairs in the rest of the country, at that time the Iranians persuaded the Russians to come in. 2015 is where you find the Russian armed forces come in. The Russians come in because they don't want to see a West-sponsored regime change. Though it is through the Saudis, they didn't want another regime change. They also had bases at Tartuf and therefore wanted to retain their naval base. Therefore they came in support of Iran. And therefore you have the Russians, with their entry, the possibility of regime change ended. And the Saudis recognized it, that this is our agenda is not going anywhere. And within a year, in 2016, the Saudis reached out to the Russians and they became partners in OPEC Plus to manage oil production, which continues to this day. So over a period of time, the militia that were agitating against Bashar al-Assad started losing steam. And therefore you found, other than Idlib and a few isolated areas, by and large, Bashar al-Assad had obtained control over his country. The Saudis, who had earlier engineered regime change, also decided it didn't serve any useful purpose. They then re-engaged with the Bashar al-Assad regime, and you see his rehabilitation from 2021 till 2023. What of the Turks? The Russians, the Iranians, and the Turks set up an Astana peace process, a peace process that would safeguard their interests vis-a-vis the Western powers who were looking to influence matters in Syria on their own through the so-called Geneva process. Neither of them went anywhere. The only significant point to note is that in 2019, the Syrian army was poised outside Idlib, and they were preparing to enter Idlib and hammer this regime of this local government of Abu Muhammad al-Jolani. The Turks intervened. The Turks intervened and persuaded the Syrian army through the Iranians not to attack, assuring the Astana process partners that we are on the same side and I am going to leave these extremists to me. Instead of doing anything about these extremists, Turkey became their sponsor and partner. And this is the background. Separately, Turkey also set up its own militia known as the Syrian National Army to confront the Syrian Democratic Forces that the Americans had put together in northeast region made up of the Kurds. So you had the Kurds, you had the Syrian National Army made up of Turkoman and Arabs. You had at that time Abu Muhammad Jolani being in control of Idlib, and the rest of the country was under Bashar al-Assad's rule. You will see that map over there. You will see largely. You see some American presence has been retained there in the Kurdish areas. We were told there are 900 of them. Actually, Trump wanted to withdraw all of them. But then he was persuaded that this would be a disaster. He asked he then withdrew the Americans, leaving behind 900, and told the Turks to manage affairs there. So it is like asking the wolf to look after a hen coop. And that is exactly what happened. The Turks then went and thrashed the Kurds thoroughly and ensured that they went nowhere with regard to their aspirations, either for autonomy or for independence. So this is the murky scenario, very complex scenario. But what you really saw, and I am part of that, you saw Bashar Assad being rehabilitated. So I am going to admit to you that we took our eyes off Idlib and focused on Damascus. and saw Bashar Assad rehabilitated, diplomats going back and forth, embassies being reopened in Damascus, foreign ministers visiting each other, and you found Bashar Assad striding into the Arab League meeting and was totally accepted by the rest of the Arabs. Therefore, he thought that this is all going to go well for him. I have mentioned to you who controlled what, therefore I won't repeat this. Just quickly, regime controlled most of the territory. Don't look at these lines very seriously because overwhelmingly it is desert. So while it looks grand, it's really towns that the regime controlled. Turkey had the buffer zone, which you can see the green areas in the north. You see the Kurds looking after all this, what is called yellow territory. Don't imagine that they controlled all of that because it's mostly desert. But you had in Idlib, in the corner right there, you see Idlib, and you find that Hayat Tahrir al-Sham is located there. The Americans have a base. You can see that base at the border. At the border, and they also have 900 troops in the Kurdish territory. The Russians have 1,500 personnel at the Tartus naval base at the Mediterranean. So this is the play in the country. Let us now look at the fall of the regime. The one point that I should make straight away is that the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham is the invention of Abu Muhammad al-Jolani. He reinvented himself slowly. In the time when he was at Idlib, you find several other groups were also there. It's not that he had a free hand. There were some of them that were offshoots of the Islamic State. Some of them were offshoots of Al-Qaeda. Some of them were local extremists. Some of them were refugees from different parts of the country who had camped there, had come there for refuge. And all of that, he put together a coalition called Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. Hayat Tahrir al-Sham then became a major presence in Idlib with the full support of the Turks. And I have also mentioned that Turkey prevented the annihilation of the HTS in 2019. The real fun story begins now. The one thing that I missed the significance, was that in 2022, Abu Muhammad Jolani was interviewed on CNN and PBS. And this should have, if I had followed that, instead of looking at Damascus, if I had looked at Idlib, alarm bells would have rung. Nobody, certainly no jihadi leader, gets to speak to CNN and PBS and to give his message. The message Abu Muhammad Jolani gave was, he shrugged off his extremism. He is now a nationalist. He believes in moderation. He doesn't believe in transnational jihad. And he is moderate and modern. The two things that go down well in Washington with regard to Islam and Muslims. Moderate and modern. And that is what worked. This is the message he gave. He looked good. And this is where he built up his persona. So the background for what has happened had been prepared already. That means what I missed was the American nexus with this. I was asked this question many times. Do the Americans prioritize their own interests, or do they prioritize the attacks on radical Islam? And my immediate answer is they always prioritize their own interests. But their conception of their interests is very short term. They do not ever understand the long-term implications of what they are doing. They are the ones who created Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan and used jihad as an instrument of state policy. They are the ones who then abandoned Afghanistan to the Taliban and fled from there. They are the ones who later on went into Libya, crushed the regime of Gaddafi, and you find that country awash with jihadis armed from Western sources. In all the places where the Americans have effected regime change, they are the ones who have sponsored the jihad. It is not that the jihadis came from nowhere and took over the country. It is due to American action or lack of it. Here you find, very strangely, they have, what is the American agenda we struggle to understand? Okay, they don't like Iran. They would like to cut off Iran's ties with Syria. They don't like the Russians because the Russians are a challenge in Ukraine. Therefore, encourage a jihadi movement. When you speak of rule-based order, when you speak of democracy versus authoritarian rulers, therefore, this is what has happened. You find that very slowly, from 27th November to 8th December, you see the steady movement of this motley group. It happened so fast that we are unable to follow everything that happened. And even now, as I speak to you, it is very difficult for us to know the truth. Because as you know, as Western interests now take shape in a certain territory, the army of misinformation moves in alongside and completely befuddles us and creates fake narratives which then become reality in the newspapers and consciousness of the global South. So you find that surprisingly, the Syrian army withers away. They do fighting in one or two places, but then they are demoralized, they go away, and then you find this is a cakewalk right into Damascus. Bashar al-Assad tries his best to mobilize Russian support and Iranian support, but he finds that his three partners are not interested. And therefore, he flees. Firstly, he had sent his family already. On the last day, there are stories appearing overwhelmingly in the American media, giving you minute-by-minute account of what happened. And on the last day, he went to Tartus and took the plane from Tartus and went to Moscow, where he is on a holiday as of now, as I speak to you. And therefore, you find this gentleman, Abu Muhammad Jolani, who occasionally wears a natty suit and a very flashy tie, now has abandoned the uniform of the guerrilla, doesn't have the scarf, he doesn't have the turban of the radical Islamist leader. He is the most moderate person you could have met. He is the one now in Damascus. Delegation upon delegation is going across to say hello to him and to say what a nice person he is. Great photo opportunity for everybody. People are thrilled. In fact, they are so thrilled with him that he changes his name and abandons his jihadi name, Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, and becomes Ahmad Hussein Ashara. Why did all this happen? We are bewildered. Let me admit to you, we don't have a straight narrative. Sometimes when I speak to people, every one of us who follow events have a different view. And I'm sure that there would be people here who have views. I had argued within 4 hours in a chat with my bête noire, Karan Thapar, who tracked me down in Pune, and I was very reluctant. He said, "Nahi, abhi bolna hai, abhi bolna hai." In 4 hours, I had not read anything. I had just seen some things here and there. And I said, this is a conspiracy of Turkey, Israel, and the United States. They are the ones who have engineered the fall of Bashar al-Assad and the installation of the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham in Damascus. I believe that. I believed it then and I believe it now. People disagree with me. People say, "Yes, ab kuch nahi hua." This was an implosion. This is self-directed. Hayat Tahrir al-Sham just took over. None of that makes sense to me. It doesn't happen like that. This was a proper army. Okay, it may not have had 300,000 soldiers, but certainly it had 150 or 200,000 soldiers, and quite likely some of them would know how to fight. But they disappeared. So now we say, was it an internal implosion or an external influence? People very strongly tell me it was an internal implosion. Was it the role of Turkey, Israel, and the US? Or some other tell me, this Israel, US were not in the picture. Turkey is a central role player. None of this makes sense to me. Turkey could not have done this major enterprise without the Americans and the Israelis on board. Who played what role is a matter of detail. The Turks are claiming major credit for sustaining Hayat Tahrir al-Sham because they have been supporting it for a fairly long time. I think that to say Israel didn't even know what's happening is a travesty. Can you imagine the Israelis next door to Syria not being aware that a major regime change is in the offing? I can't believe that that would be so. I think the Israelis may have supported it because they thought that the Iranians getting out of Syria is a greater strategic achievement in any case. So that would be, and for the Americans, this would be, of course, the embarrassment of Russia. And if you see the American media of those days, you see they are triumphalists, that now the Russians have been shown that they are paper tigers, that they have no future in West Asia, they have no future in Ukraine, and they are finished. They have no capacity to fight, they have no capacity to look after their allies, etc. Very major meanings have been read all across West Asia about the Russians. So the Americans were totally triumphant. And then, of course, they have rushed various delegations. Europeans have shown up and all, and they have talked about how they can contribute to reconstruction and what have you. I see, even today, as I speak to you, there have been very serious consultations between the Americans and the Turks. Okay, it may serve Turkish interests to be in the forefront. And as you know, Erdogan has not lost the opportunity, has straight away gone, and he has talked to his people, and they have applauded him robustly. He says this is the beginning of the Turkish century. So I still believe that. Was there any role of Qatar and Saudi Arabia? My own impression as of now, I don't think Saudi Arabia they were anxious for regime change in 2011, 2012. But by that time, they had accommodated Syria and they had also re-engaged with the Iranians. I am not sure they were interested in such a major upheaval, the consequences of which are not known to us even as we speak. Qatar is said to be happy with HTS in power in Damascus because they have an Islamic affiliation and they have a sensitivity. They are working with the Turks even as we speak, and they could have been. But neither of them, I believe, was an active role player in these major developments that have happened. Why did the Iranian, the Russian, and the Hezbollah not fight on behalf of Assad? This is still being discussed and debated. There are many thoughts that are being thrown up. One is that it was conveyed to the Iranians and the Russians that this is a lost cause, that they are not going to fight, you are going to lose, it is far better to cut your losses and get out. It served. Both of them were very badly hit. In any case, Iran had been badly troubled because of the Israel attacks. Russia was already under pressure with Ukraine. The last thing they needed was a major military conflagration and support of a so-called losing cause. Why were they impressed? Why were they persuaded that this is a losing cause? We don't know. Why did the army disintegrate? We do not know. I had said to Karan Thapar on the day this happened, on 8 December, I said that the message conveyed to the armed forces generals was that if you try to fight, the Israelis are going to bomb you from the air. And do recall, this is what had happened after the Iraqis had withdrawn from Kuwait. The American forces hit them and called it some turkey shoot. And that is what they killed several thousand retreating Iraqi soldiers at that time from the air. So I just said this. I don't have any evidence. I don't have a source. But I said the only situation in which the Syrian army would disintegrate would be the message given to their generals that you come out to fight, you are going to be shot from the air. And as you know, at that time, the Israelis were shooting everybody from the air. They had killed already 46,000 people in Gaza. They had killed 5,000 people in Lebanon. Therefore, that's what they do. They kill from the air. They follow the American example that the best thing to do, never put your feet on the ground, kill from the air, and you have license to kill. If James Bond could kill one person at a time, these people can kill several 100,000 people at a time. This is what the Americans have done in Afghanistan. They had matched first day of assault after 9/11. They killed 100,000 people. Exactly that happened in Iraq as well. All of them were, they are called Taliban or whatever, or Al-Qaeda. They were called Al-Qaeda. You can spot the Al-Qaeda from the air, and therefore you can kill 100,000, and they're all Al-Qaeda anyway. So this is the way it works. This was my view, but I have also admitted to you publicly, I do not know whether this was actually conveyed to the army or not. I don't know. But we leave it at that. Our great hero of West Asia, Netanyahu, has taken credit as well. So there you have Turkey taking credit and preparing the ground for the Turkish century, and here you have Netanyahu suggesting that there was. So these were some of the things that I had in mind, Netanyahu's statement, etc., when I said Israel is a very major role player in this. The statement is very convoluted, a direct result of the blows we have inflicted on Iran and Hezbollah, Assad's main supporters. Let us leave it at this and move forward. Where do we go from here? There are huge areas of uncertainty because we know very little. Other than the photo opportunities that Ahmad Hussein Ashara has gone through, we don't know we know very little. Does the government have governance capacity? American media reminds us Idlib was governed by HTS, therefore they have government capability. They ran this municipality very well, collected taxes, had educational facilities, health facilities, and what have you. So they have governance capacity. Not evident so far. We do not know. It's a very, very difficult thing, but so far we have not seen governance. We have seen photo opportunities. We see this natty suit. Sometimes he comes out in a guerrilla uniform with a nicely cut beard and looking really photogenic, but we don't know whether he can govern. Are they legitimate? You could say that in war, who cares? So if you are in power, you are legitimate. We don't know. But is he moderate? This is the man who was part of the ISIS. He swore loyalty to Ayman Zawahiri, and then he built up his own extremist movement, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. And then when the Americans started cultivating him, he became moderate. One cannot but be skeptical. We do not know. Very easy to be skeptical. I am skeptical about it, but we do not know. To what extent can he be called moderate? To what extent can you say that now extremism is behind us? What American writers have said, that transnational jihad is over, only Islamic nationalism or Islamic national Islamism or Islamic nationalism. You know, those jihadi movements, the extremist movement who do not want to go out of their own country, like Taliban is a national Islamic movement. They don't have interest abroad. Only two movements, the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda, were transnational movements. All the other are national movements. So he has reinvented himself. And now he is therefore a nationalist movement. Is he an Islamist? Now, as you know, not all Islamists are of three hues. There is the Saudi Wahhabi, which is now has disappeared. You have the Muslim Brotherhood, which is a quasi-moderate movement. It is a movement that seeks to marry Islamic norms with the norms of parliamentary democracy. It talks about constitution, free elections, and what have you. Is it that kind of Muslim Brotherhood affiliated Islamic movement? Or has it abandoned Islamicism entirely? We don't have evidence of that. Whatever we know, that it is an Islamic movement, it has various influences upon it, it is a coalition, do recall, and therefore you find that various other Islamic groups are also part of the movement, and therefore we do not know. It's not a cohesive, it is a coalition. Other leaders haven't come in as yet. We do not know where they are just now. I deliberately put this picture of Jolani when he was Abu Muhammad Jolani, looking like an Islamic leader. The person, then you have another issue, the issue of diversity. As you know, in times of crisis, when the political order is fragile and the center falls, you find fault lines emerge, and emerge with vehemence. You find at that time that you find the discord becomes very palpable. It is like what I used to say, that the fault lines are all there in every state order, but certain elements scratch all those fault lines and make them bleed. And I think this is what could happen. We don't know. Because you have emerged, Syria has emerged from 15 years of conflict. Only in the last couple of years there was some degree of peace. But before that there was very major conflict. Very large number of extremist elements had emerged. They are flush with weaponry of different kinds. They come from different ideological backgrounds. Are they going to be, we use terms like, collective terms, and we believe it somehow defines the entire group. As we say, for example, in our own country, the Muslims, as if to say 200 million Muslims are one collective bunch of sheep, and they think alike and move alike and are a collective danger to the national order. So similarly, these collective terms are very, very misleading. We use the term, for example, the Arabs, the Arab world, as if to say this entire territory from Morocco up to Yemen is one collective bloc. It is not. Similarly, Islam or Islamic countries, they are all extremely different from each other, and that is where fault lines emerge. It is in periods of discord, in periods of conflict, that you are likely to see this emerging. Does Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, Ahmad Ashara, have this kind of capacity to be able to bring all these people together under the banner of his rule? Very difficult to say, because we have no previous knowledge or experience about it. It is a very, very fragile order. And then, of course, you have the Kurds. The Kurds are, as far as HTS is concerned, they have been fighting the Kurds. As far as Turkey is concerned, they have been fighting the Kurds. The Kurds have, therefore, they are now wondering, where do we go from here? They are trying to reinvent themselves. By the way, nobody trusts the Americans. The Kurds had thought that the Americans were their patrons, and in 2019, Trump had told them that he withdrew his troops from there, who were their protectors, and told the Turks, you look after this region. And therefore, they have had that experience. So they don't really, in their heart of hearts, no Kurd will ever trust any American, because they have been let down so often, both in Iraq as well as in Syria. So now where do we go from here? The person in the middle is a Mazloum Kobani. He is the Kurdish leader. He is also has been their military commander. He enjoys the support of the Americans, and he is the one who is today seeking to make the best of the situation, surrounded by the Turks on the one hand and the HTS on the other. Now, the American diplomacy, if we can use this grand word for whatever they do, is to encourage HTS to engage with the Kurds. No evidence of that just yet. No evidence of that. What you do have is Kobani, this gentleman, engaging with Barzani. Now you will be suddenly surprised how I brought in an Iraqi Kurd's name. Barzani is in charge of Arbil in Iraq. He is in the pay of the Turks and has been for several years. He's a hardcore sellout as far as Kurds are concerned. He is the one who has visited Kobani and is now engaged with Kobani, basically conveying the message of the Turks. The message is, cut off your links with the PKK. Cut off your links with the Turkish Kurds. Ensure that you will be respected and tolerated. Do not become aggressive as far as the Turks are concerned. And of course, Barzani would give you that message because he has flowered and has been blessed by this affiliation with the Turks over several years. And therefore, to betray the PKK is not something new, and it's something which he has been pushing Kobani to achieve. Also, the Turks have separately had a meeting, or rather they've encouraged the PKK to have a meeting with Öcalan, who is the leader of the PKK in Turkey, suggesting that this would be a good time for you to become moderate within Turkey and share in the joy of the Turkish century. So we have that as well. So we will see a mess. And then you see the last picture, which is the reality of all realities. This is what really Syria is all about. All the things that I have said, you must keep your eyes on this picture. Of course, you will see similar pictures with regard to Gaza, and you will wonder whether you're looking at Gaza or you're looking at Syria. But this is what Syria looks like. Almost all their major cities have been hammered very badly. And of course, we use one word, and we believe that that solves everything: reconstruction, rehabilitation, reconstruction. You have 3 million Syrian refugees in Turkey wanting to come home. Within the country itself, several million have been displaced, and they want to go home, except that where is that home? Where is the home that they will go to? So I think we have very serious economic issues. Is Ahmad Ashara going to be the great economic miracle bringer, bring this economic miracle? I therefore have highlighted issues that should agitate all of us with regard to the future. And then you look at the foreign area. What does Turkey want? Turkey, a friend of mine who has served in Ankara said, Turkey is serious about neo-Ottomanism. Erdogan is truly committed to recalling the glories of the Ottomans. He has shrugged off the influence of Kemal Atatürk and has gone to the earlier glory of the Ottomans, the glory that was theirs both in the Islamic world and in the councils of world power. They were a world power up to the 18th century and therefore held their own. That is the pinnacle of Muslim influence and authority at that time. And he wants to recreate that. And that is what. I had given up on this new Ottoman business because of the economic malaise in Turkey, and the Turks then stopped talking about Ottomanism and started talking to the Saudis and to the Emiratis and to the Egyptians. But now with the fall of Assad, you find that discourse re-emerging in Ankara, talking about Islamic glory and of what great things the Turks are going to do. Keep an eye on that. I find it very difficult to really accept at face value what Erdogan does. Erdogan is truly a very slippery personality. You never know where he is. Sometimes he sings the Islamic song and sometimes he sings the moderate song of engagement and economic betterment. So we will keep an eye on that. What is he going to do with the Kurds? He has made it very clear that in his agenda, there is no place for the SDF or for the Syrian Kurds. Barzani is counseling moderation there and suggesting that, look, you reinvent yourself and you forget about the PKK. They can look after themselves. You are no longer going to be the training ground and the sanctuary for them. We don't. Erdogan, no compromise on the Kurdish issue. And therefore, his armed forces are still there. They are deep inside Syrian territory, 50 to 100 kilometers, deep inside Iraq, and also have very close ties with the Tripoli government. So Turkey has spread its wings and is there in the East Mediterranean. That though I thought that they are moderating their Islamic agenda, it appears that it is perhaps not the case. What about Israel? Israel has chosen this golden opportunity to hammer the Syrian armed forces, armed capability. The forces have already disappeared. The armed capabilities, they have destroyed, they have attacked an Air Force base, they have attacked a research facility, they have also captured the buffer zone in the Golan Heights. They already occupied Golan Heights, now they have gone further, and the way they are conducting themselves, they are not going away from there in any time soon. It doesn't matter whatever the UN may say. Are they concerned? See, at one level, you must recall that Netanyahu and Israel had actually good ties with Bashar Assad. And that is the point, that Bashar Assad, and there is a rumor that Bashar Assad's intelligence was actually very close to the Israeli intelligence. It is said, in West Asia, you can say anything because it's a land of conspiracy, and that is what people have said. Loose talk. No writing, so I can't source it, I can't give a footnote, but there is a talk that Bashar Assad and the Israelis had a pretty cozy relationship, and therefore to say that the Israelis brought him down makes no sense. very difficult to say now because whatever this, the issue for the Israelis is this. Are you comfortable with these Islamics in power in Damascus? And that is what we have to look at. We will keep an eye. As of now, the Israelis are flying high, literally and figuratively. They have smashed the military capacity of Syria. Totally. And therefore, I'm not sure there is where that would go. The Russians have been playing very low-key. There are rumors that they are still at Tartus. Other rumors are that they have moved to Libya, but I don't know, and I don't have enough information on that. Where do now my Gulf countries come in along with Egypt? They seem to be accommodating the Islamist takeover of Damascus. The literature says Saudi Arabia, as you know, when they were quizzed by Obama as to what happens after Bashar Assad's fall in 2011, 2012, they were talking to a Muslim Brotherhood affiliated entity known as al-Islah Party. So they were not opposed to Islamists coming in, particularly a moderate Islamic movement. Saudi Arabia appears to be engaged with HTS, and their foreign minister has already visited Saudi Arabia, even as I speak to you. The question mark was about the UAE. The UAE has conveyed that they are deeply concerned about the Islamic movement. Any Islamic movement is viewed as a threat to the UAE. UAE is a small country, has 6-7 million people. 1 million of them are Emiratis, and in the throes of the Arab Spring uprisings, more than 100 Emiratis were arrested because they had indicated in their internet activity, they had indicated some interest in or affiliation with their own Islah party, the Brotherhood party within the UAE. They are still in jail and they are not getting out anytime soon. The Gulf will finally have to be the source of funding for reconstruction. Qatar is likely to be a major role player. Qatar appears to be comfortable with the regime that has emerged, but we still have a long way to go. And then we have the Americans. Americans are keeping, you saw an extraordinary flurry of activity of the Americans in the last few months. They were all over the place, engaging with all over different people, right from Bangladesh to Damascus and everything in between. This kind of activism had not been apparent earlier. But we therefore wonder, what did they want? You could say very easily, they went along with the Israelis to get rid of the Iranians from Syria. And they also wanted to embarrass the Russians. There is every indication today, as I speak to you, that the Americans are seeking to bring Syria into the Western alliance. And this would change. There would be a sea change in the security scenario of West Asia with a major country like Syria moving into the Western alliance. When we say Syria and moving into the Western alliance, I want to also do a reality check. It's very easy for me to say Syria because Syria's borders exist, but Syria within itself, the domestic turmoil is so significant, I'm not sure it brings strategic value to anybody just yet. There has been a ceasefire in Gaza, so I'm now shifting my gaze from Syria to Gaza. There is a ceasefire. Trump almost certainly played a central role in ensuring that it went through. Netanyahu had treated Biden with supreme contempt and publicly humiliated him on occasion. And here Trump sent his own special envoy for the Middle East, Witkoff, and I think Witkoff, you have read all the literature, Witkoff made it clear to Netanyahu that you are not going anywhere, you're going to send your chaps back and you're going to announce a peace ceasefire before Trump enters the White House. And actually that was done. And therefore you find that yesterday you began the process of implementing the first phase. There has been a lot of discussion about the second phase, whether the second phase that involves the release of the balance of the Israeli hostages who are alive and the Israeli withdrawal from Gaza to a buffer zone that it will create of 800 meters width outside Gaza, so that Gaza remains a wretched prison house even after the Israeli withdrawal, rather than maintain Israeli troops within Gaza. This is something which we don't know. The person who quizzed me yesterday, Karan Thapar, was very insistent that I somehow say to him that phase 2 won't work. And I held back. And I have been asked after that, why did you hold back? I agree with anybody who says that they are skeptical about phase 2. But I see no reason why I should succumb to this blandishment. My own view is very simple. This is a comprehensive agreement. It is a composite agreement. It has 3 phases, but it's one agreement. And it's an agreement which has been supported by the Americans. So can Donald Trump say, I supported the agreement, I went along with phase 1, but I am ready to go along with Netanyahu and not implement phase 2 and phase 3. That was my concern in emphasizing the point. It is a composite agreement. That phase 2 also has certain, it also includes the release of the remaining hostages who are alive. Of course, phase 3 has the return of dead bodies, which is as important for the Israelis as the return of those who are still alive. I would therefore insist that this is a composite agreement and that we should accept it as a composite agreement and then see what our brother in Israel, Netanyahu, comes up with to ensure that he gets the best result out of all this. My own sense is as follows, and I mentioned this yesterday, and that is, post phase 1, there will be politics in Washington and politics in Tel Aviv. If Netanyahu believes he can keep his coalition together and that despite the withdrawal, he can either prevent the withdrawal of the extreme right wing, or he can ensure, or if they leave, he still has the majority support within the Knesset. He will be fine. He'll go along with phase 2. We don't know if the government falls. I don't think the government will fall. There is no reason to believe just yet that will happen. I think there is a broad support for the agreement. Some literature says 70% of the Israelis support the ceasefire agreement, and therefore there are 30% who don't. And those are the people who came out on the streets day before yesterday. But I think the vast majority would like to go ahead with this ceasefire, and I think that is where it will go. Overwhelmingly, after a downturn for some time, Netanyahu is today once again in the good books of his own people. He has recovered lost ground. His political standing is pretty high. His coalition is under pressure, but he is a wily character. My own sense is the extreme right wing have experienced power for the first time. There are 14 of them in the Knesset. This is a very crucial number to keep the government in place. They have tasted power for the first time. It is unlikely that for the sake of their ideological belief or their religious belief, they'll bring the government down just yet. There are also articles which have from the American press which have said that Netanyahu has given them assurances that he stands ready to start the war the moment he senses that Hamas is not playing ball. We don't know whether that is in fact possible. At this stage, he has said that. He is also believed to have told Smotrich and Ben-Gvir that don't imagine the Israelis will totally leave Gaza. That when the humanitarian aid comes in trucks, it will be the Israelis who will inspect the trucks. Therefore, there will be an Israeli presence within Gaza. It is not that Gaza is being abandoned. Recall here that the extreme right wing had wanted northern Gaza to be evacuated, and therefore they can restart the process of building settlements, Israeli settlements in northern Gaza. That appears to have been abandoned because we see now that the Israelis have agreed to a steady movement, under controlled conditions, steady movement of Palestinians returning to the northern area. Of course, they search for their homes and they won't find any of them. I want to also make one or two other points. Very few of us had truly seen with our own eyes that Israel is governed by religious zealots. It had projected itself as a country that is liberal and democratic. and it used to tout the fact that it is the only democracy in West Asia. It needed a certain effort to find out that there is an entire body of literature within Israel that shows Israel as an extremely xenophobic and extremely racist entity. It is a country that is moving towards apartheid, and that is what is now exposed. It needed, when I wrote my third book, Children of Abraham at War, I went to Jerusalem to buy Israeli literature because I did not want to quote anything except which had been written by an Israeli or another Jewish person, because I did not want the accusation that you are against us anyway. Everything that I have said in Children of the xenophobia, the racism, the apartheid status, all of that is written by Israeli sources. And therefore you find it is now, Israel also has shown that it is totally dependent on the Americans. It is an extremely violent country. It is, as far as the Palestinians are concerned, they exercise violence with total impunity. There is no law in the world that can restrain them. And they believe they are now pursuing God's own purpose in this regard. There is the total impunity in this regard. But everything that they have done in Gaza and in the other neighboring places has been done only with the support of the Americans. It is the Americans that supplied weaponry from day 2. From 8th October, you had the massive movement of American aid, and that has continued. And as Biden completes his administration, he has promised even more, $20 billion more military assistance to Israel. Absent American aid, it is very unlikely that Israel would have had this kind of firepower and this kind of cruelty that we have witnessed over the last few months. The United States has found itself totally incapable of restraining Netanyahu. If you read the book War by Bob Woodward, which just came out a few weeks ago, you show a pathetic Biden sitting in the White House abusing Netanyahu, but does not have the courage to say anything in the public domain, swallows humiliation upon humiliation at the hands of the Israeli leader. When we look at the longer term, I'll go very fast on this, move with. There is an indication that the axis of resistance is finished and that Israel is triumphant, and that Iran is possibly on its knees. This is part of misinformation. You find Israeli literature itself, as also Blinken, have said that Hamas have replenished their fallen comrades, and possibly their strength today in Gaza is the same as what it was before the war began. All of us knew that. Netanyahu is told by Biden, quoted verbatim in War, saying, Netanyahu, Bibi, he calls him Bibi, Bibi, you cannot kill Hamas with firepower, with military force. Hamas is an idea. Unless you address the idea, you cannot defeat Hamas. He says this, it's quoted verbatim in the book. Therefore, it's not shocking or surprising. All of us who have followed these extremist movements will be able to confirm that they are never defeated by military force. They take a lot of casualty, but they replenish themselves. As I speak to you, Hezbollah has been hit very hard, but from the day of the death of Nasrallah, every day they have showered missiles on the Israelis, because they don't function as a hierarchy, integrated hierarchy. They function through separate troops. You find that the Iraqi Shia militia continue to have firepower of their own, and the Houthis have not been demolished either. With regard to Iran itself, I think that it has been wounded. Israelis have told us that in their bombing, they took out the entire defense capabilities of Iran. We do not know. We have no means of knowing. Iran has not said anything. Iran has chosen this moment to show to the international community its own firepower. and that it has mentioned it and it keeps on mentioning some rocket, some missile, some military equipment or the other. They also are following a two-pronged diplomatic effort. Number one, they have signed a comprehensive strategic partnership agreement with the Russians. This happened day before yesterday when the President Pezeshkian went over to Moscow, and they have signed this agreement. It is a substantial agreement. I don't believe that it has any immediate military implications. I don't think so. I don't think the Russians are going to come in. It is an indication, number one, that Iran is not isolated and that over a period of time they will rebuild their capabilities sooner rather than later. Israeli media at the same time are alarmed. And they say that this agreement between Russia and Iran portends the revival of the nuclear program, and that it is that Russia will share nuclear weapons capabilities with the Iranians. That is something to be concerned about. That is what we find in that. But there is the opposite that is happening as well. The Iranians have extended an olive branch. Their delegations are still talking to the E3, the EU3, the E3, sorry, where you have UK, France, and Germany on the revival of the nuclear agreement. They're talking to IAEA, and their president made a very substantial statement at the UNGA, which he has repeated in different ways after that he is happy in a set of circumstances to revive the conversation relating to the JCPOA. So, let us see. We don't know enough to be able to predict one or the other. The tremendous American diplomatic effort is to win over Saudi Arabia and get it to normalize ties with the Israelis. I think that particular moment has passed. There is a reluctance to accept this on the American side, but I believe whatever I have read in terms of the Saudi view, it is also there in Bob Woodward's book, where Blinken meets Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, who tells him, I will normalize ties with Israel, subject to Israel creating a Palestinian state. When I say Palestinian state, I don't mean a pro forma statement of agreement saying that we will create it at some stage. I want actual movement towards a Palestinian state. So I think the Saudi side is, I think at this stage, I would say, very clear. I have not seen any source which would suggest that the Saudis are wobbling on this subject. They want to have good ties with the Americans, but they also have very substantial relations both with the Russians and with the Chinese. So I think strategic autonomy remains intact as far as the Saudis are concerned. Qatar and UAE have their own subtle competition or not so subtle competition with each other, but as of now they seem to be working reasonably well. I mentioned to you that in March 2024, the GCC came up with a consensual vision for regional security. Hardly anyone noted it. And I saw it only by accident when somebody quoted something from there and brought it to my attention, and it led to a paper that I have written since then. Where will therefore West Asia go? I believe that Saudi Arabia and Iran will maintain substantial relations. I don't believe there will be an estrangement, nor do I believe the Saudis are going to go into the Western camp. Turkey is talking the language of neo-Ottomanism. How serious is it? How long drawn will it be? Will they be able to sustain it given their economic situation at home? Is this really the time for Ottomanism and neo-Ottomanism? It's so completely day before yesterday's story. But they talk about it and we have to hear it. Can Egypt come back? I think Egypt has the potential to be a player in the region, but not in West Asia. I believe West Asia is already spoken for. Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Turkey and Israel are the major players that are going to be there. You are not going to see these others. Egypt will be a player in Africa. They are very much involved with what is happening in the Horn of Africa, and I think that is where they may finally find their place. Not to be scorned at. Do recall that Egypt dominates the Red Sea and also dominates the Eastern Mediterranean. It also has substantial gas resources, which if husbanded properly, you could see a pretty good economic scenario at home. So we will leave it at that. Can Israel change? And that is a question which is constantly put to us, that Israel has a messianic view. A messianic view that asserts that this is the land of Israel. The land of Israel is exclusive for the exclusive use of the Jewish people, that they alone have this right. This is a sacred dispensation of the good Lord, and that the extremist view is that no non-Jew can occupy or be resident in this territory, and that there is sanction from the good Lord for three options: extermination, enslavement, or exile. In this scenario, can we envisage a Palestine? Very difficult to say. I would say that it is, I'm not seriously looking at a Palestine, a sovereign state of Palestine in the near future. But I don't dismiss it. I believe that things are changing. Generations are changing before us. Many of the contentions that are taking place today are the product of people who belong to some other period. People who were born in the 50s and 60s. And today the present generation has moved on very, very far away from some of these agitations. I therefore envisage that in Israel, you could easily have a young population that emerges over a period of time that recognizes that conflict serves little useful purpose in the age of technology and artificial intelligence, in the age of importance of trade and connectivity. In this scenario, what is this messianic claim on a piece of territory based on the Old Testament alone? And therefore, I feel that you could have a certain change that will emerge, and what will finally emerge at that stage will be a one-state solution where and as you know, the Palestinian and the Arab and the Jew are actually children of Abraham, literally so as per the Old Testament, and therefore they are brothers of each other, and therefore have full capacity to live together. Also, I want to stress to you something which is very little known, that this idea of the Jewish people as an ethnic community is of 19th century origin. The Jews are, I would quote to you Nur Masleha, who argues that there is one people who have lived for 4,000 years in what is today called the land of Israel, but was always called for several millennia the state, it was called Palestine. And the people who lived there were Palestinians, and it doesn't matter what faith you had. You were Jewish, or you were Zoroastrian, or you were Christian, or you were Muslim. You were, at the end of the day, Palestinian. The idea of an ethnic divide, an ethnic binary between the Jew and the Arab is of very recent origin, and possibly emerges from the theories that were resonant with European imperialism and colonialism when they had these racist theories at that time. We don't know. We will look at all of these are going to be complex scenarios, and we have a long way to go. I want to end with this. These are some broad reflections, just of a student struggling to understand and to make some sense of what has happened and where we are going. Has West Asia actually been transformed? Netanyahu says he has transformed it. He has changed the balance of power. He believes now Israel is triumphalist. It is at the top. I personally believe there is very little real change. The Palestine issue remains unaddressed. The issue of Iran's place in this region remains unaddressed. The issue of Israel's place in West Asia remains unaddressed, as it was before. You have the emergence of Turkey. You have the assertions of Saudi Arabia. You have the affiliations of Qatar. And you have the turmoil in Syria. All of these do not indicate a real transformation. It simply affirms to me that the issues that have agitated West Asia remain in place almost exactly as they were before. But one thing has changed, and this is something which I am saying with a certain degree of objectivity. I believe at an emotional plane that the massacre of people in Gaza, 47,000 of them in 15 months, marks to me the nadir of Arab and Islamic standing in world affairs. This has not been a particularly impressive standing earlier. Since the last 200 and odd years, you had Islam, quote unquote, as talked about, Islam the faith and Muslims the people, conflated in the one word Islam, unique to the Muslim people, not applied to any other community. Islam as a strategic force in world affairs is today insignificant. It has emerged from time to time and has been resonant. Very often we have seen them in the shape of extremism. I have identified this as resistance. And the subtitle of my book, West Asia at War, says repression, resistance, and great power games. It is an attribute of resistance. That means the Arab people, and by extension the Muslim people, have not accepted the malaise to which they have been subjected. The malaise, which is a combination of the interventions of Western powers and the manipulations and co-option of their own leaders at home. So this is, to my mind, it is the nadir. I must also ask one more question. That Israel dines out, Israel has total impunity with regard to the mass massacre that it has inflicted upon the Palestinians over the last 40 years, on the basis that it experienced the Holocaust. And I ask you this, is this license to kill eternal? Because the Europeans mistreated the Jews, the Christians mistreated the Jews for nearly 2,000 years and subjected them to pogroms and subjected them to humiliations and ghettos, and finally it culminated in the Holocaust. None of this happened outside Europe. The Jews lived with great care, they lived comfortably and in safety and in respect in all the Muslim territories. Recall here that when the Christians took over, when the Catholics took over Spain and they removed the Muslims and the Jews from there, it is to the Muslim kingdoms that the Jews went for refuge. And it is in the Muslim empires and kingdoms of North Africa and West Asia that the Jews flourished, where their culture was protected and their faith was rejuvenated. Maimonides is a product of this. And therefore I ask this, can you therefore inflict such violence upon people whose ancestors had done nothing to harm you, and you affiliate yourself with the European powers whose ancestors had done every harm and damage to you? I therefore ask this question, can Holocaust remain the excuse or the reason to inflict the war crimes that we are looking at? And does this not mean that the idea of resistance will persist? My book and research bring out that over the last 150 years and so on, the Arab people have never accepted the status in which they find themselves when it came to the assault on the colonial powers or authoritarian powers in their own countries, or on the various, and the cohabitation of their rulers with the Western powers at the expense of their own people. I have argued in my book that even extremist Islam was the last effort made by Muslims to actually take on Western powers with violence and also confront their own supine governments. Is therefore West Asia condemned to forever war? And I would say to you that I have argued earlier in the previous slide that possibly, just possibly, things could change. But in the most immediate set of circumstances, are we looking at the triumph of the West? In the case you have two conflicts that are ongoing and one confrontation. two conflicts in Ukraine and in Gaza, in West Asia. And you have the confrontation in the Indo-Pacific, particularly in the South China Sea, in the West Pacific. We are looking at the emergence of a new order, the challenge to American hegemony. Therefore, my interpretation of these two conflicts is the American effort to ensure that their hegemony remains intact. And therefore, they have confronted the Russians in Ukraine, and they have encouraged the decimation of all opposition to Western powers in West Asia at the hands of the Israelis. And as I have mentioned already, the Israelis could not have done any of this violence without the Americans. So it is an American project in Ukraine and an American project in West Asia. It is in this scenario that I would argue to you that the world order that we are looking at and that might emerge is likely to have two levels. At one level, at the military security level, it could be binary. It could be a new Cold War. It would be, and this Cold War, I would suggest to you, could be civilizational. I laughed and was treated with contempt Huntington's book, The Clash of Civilizations, that emerged 30 years ago, because he posited the clash of Islam with the West. And look at the cover of the book that I have put before you, the Crescent versus the American. But now, as I have told you, Islam is in retreat as a political and strategic force. What is in ascendance is the civilization of the Russian civilization and the Cynic civilization. Both have defined themselves as civilizational states. And they are the ones that at the apex level will confront the so-called Enlightenment states of the West, the United States and Western Europe. So it would, to my mind, be possibly a regurgitation of a modified regurgitation of the clash of civilization that Huntington had spoken of. An orthodox and cynic alignment that he had possibly not envisaged. I have not read the book recently, but he had not envisaged. This is likely to be the shape of things to come. Very early stages today. But the second plane at which many of these things are happening, the churn in world affairs, is the emergence of middle powers. Right across the world, from Europe to Asia, you find middle powers now asserting themselves, rejecting the idea of a binary competition or conflict, asserting their role in spaces where they are dominant on issues that affect them. And you have a whole range of states that are considered middle powers or middle states. And you have France and Germany in Europe, and you have in Asia, you have Japan and Korea, Australia, Malaysia, Indonesia, India, and then of course Iran and Turkey and Saudi Arabia. These are all of them asserting, not all of, sorry, I apologize, except for Japan and to a lesser extent Korea and Australia, they are tied with the West. The rest are asserting strategic autonomy. The implications of what I have placed before you in terms of the coming order, the competition at the apex level and the assertion of middle powers for strategic autonomy, and the Chinese and the Russians asserting that they support a multipolar world order rather than a binary competition. This is something that we have to look at. And the last point, history tells, when you look at West Asia, 3,000, 4,000 years, 4 people have engaged with each other. The Arab, the Persian, the Jew, and the last 1,000 years, the Turk. Their fortunes have been influenced by incursions from the West. You have the Persian Empire engaged with the Greeks and the to and fro battles between them. Civilizational connectivity, of course, battles interspersed from time to time. You had the Romans spreading their influence into West Asia. You had Alexander the Great, after the Persian, Alexander the Great, Romans, and then you had the Asian empires spreading into Southeast Europe, the Ottoman Empire. So, and for a long period, till the 20th century, they were in ascendancy in parts of Europe. So you have these, only in the last 200 years do you find Western powers became dominant in West Asia and other parts of Asia. And this is the interplay of people who have known each other, engaged with each other, civilizationally linked with, enriched each other. There have been books that have come out recently about how West Asia enriched the West, and now Dalrymple has favored us with a book about how India also was engaged with the West. So there has been a narrative of civilizational connectivity interspersed from time to time with military conflict. And therefore it should tell us one last lesson, that there is no room in history for triumphalism. For those who were at rock bottom in world affairs have emerged and become significant, and those who were insignificant, they have now faded away. So this is the pattern of international affairs. So if you take a very broad historic view, then you will see that so much has happened, so much keeps on happening, and we snatch a moment and build our entire narrative on that experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Tilmiz. Really, that was an, outstanding tour de force on not just West Asia, but I think it is kind of global in sweep. And you understand what I mean when I said that once the lecturer or the professor in him gets going, it's very difficult to stop him. And I think perhaps it would have been a travesty to try to do so, because we would have missed actually the breadth and sweep of everything that you have spoken today. At the start of this talk, I had a lot of questions. And I must say, as you proceeded, I found them one by one dropping off. So at the end of it, I have very few questions left, but very little time as well for the rest of the discussion. So I know I can keep my questions at bay for the time being, unless we find a shortage. I know there are quite a few experts on West Asia and international affairs here. I see Wael for one of them, many others, Omer, Bashir, of course, many of you. So let me throw the floor open to questions. Please identify yourself, and if you have any affiliations, state them. And also please wait for the microphone so that everyone else can hear you. Is there someone? Okay, would you like to start? Can you start?
Thank you for considering my question. My name is Shresh Sharma. I'm a research intern at Center of Geoeconomics for the Global South. First of all, thank you for such an insightful presentation, worth watching throughout the entirety. And my question is regarding al-Jolani, because in December when he took power, there were talks about Russia being thrown out of Syria from Tartus and all those establishments that they have over there. But in an interaction, al-Jolani actually expressed interest in cooperating with the Russians at some point of time. Immediately afterwards, the Ukrainian delegation came to Syria, and they had interactions which were expressed to be very positive by the Ukrainian delegation. Haven't read of the Syrian delegation's experiences yet. But how do you see the presence of Russians in the future? Do you think there will ever be a scope for cooperation with al-Jolani? Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take a few questions more. First Omer, then you, and then behind them.
Omer Ahmed, I'm a journalist. Two questions. I think you they were there, but you didn't go into them. One, really interested in your opinion of how China has played out in this thing, because China was also really important in the Hamas Palestinian Authority agreement earlier, but has kind of seems to have stepped back, or maybe that's just view. I'd like to know a little more about what you wanted to speak about China because you had it up there. The second thing is that both Yemen and Syria were MBS projects from his earlier days. Both of them have been incredible disasters for MBS and for Saudi Arabia in some form or manner. Has Saudi geopolitics matured somewhat, and where is it going now?
Thank you.
Again, thank you very much for such an insightful talk. This is Mujibur Rahman. My question is with regard to the big conclusion that you drew out of it in connection with the class of civilization argument. It seems that you're trying to argue that as if there is some kind of a concrete alignment that has taken place, which is both institutional and ideological, and that's likely to continue. And my question is this: would you still argue if the main actor in all these regions are replaced or disappear, say Putin in Russia, the Chinese president, or Erdogan, or Netanyahu? Do you still expect that those institutional and ideological forces would operate in the same manner, or the dynamics would change? Thank you.
Thank you.
Scenario
Last question.
personal?
Next in the second
Is the
round.
scenario personal, the personal project of these three leaders, or is it something which is a flow of history?
Oh, you got it.
My name is Mohammad Nawaz Sharif, Dhanmanjari University, Manipur research scholar. So my question is, there are some forces there in Syria, among the Syrian rebels. They represent Xinjiang province.
Uyghurs.
So yeah, that they consider themselves as they call it as East Turkestan. So will it be a potential threat for China? So this is my question.
I think that question is a little out of the frame, but Ambassador, please.
Very quickly, I don't think the Russians are going anywhere. They are deeply entrenched in West Asia. They are likely to continue. The reason they did not fight was because they no longer saw any advantage in backing Bashar al-Assad. Bashar al-Assad was already the previous day's news. He didn't matter. And they were looking at safeguarding their interests in the future. They are strategic role players. And I don't think that Jolani is doing anything to say that they should be no longer there. As of now, they are biding their time. I am a little confused, and someone might correct me. I understand the Russian base in Tartus remains.
I think so.
It's not gone, it's not closed down. But how significant that is, I don't know. The commentary from Russian sources indicates that Russia, it's not that Americans, there are people with Russian names who write on behalf of the US, just as there are Indians and there are Iranians who write from the US and may give you the impression that they are actually giving you the news of that country. It's not. They are Americans. The people in Moscow also have a wide variety of views from different sources. The few that I have read, because this has not been an area of focus for me, the few writers who I have read don't see Russia as packing its bags and going away. Russia is deeply involved. Just say OPEC Plus is something that doesn't capture the headlines, but it's a very significant alignment with regard to oil, and which has benefited all these oil producers from 2016. So I think the Russians are going to be there. Russia has also built very strong ties with Saudi Arabia and all the other Gulf countries, not on the scale of China, certainly, but they have substantial ties. More importantly, Iran. The Comprehensive Strategic Partnership Agreement, which complements the Chinese agreement of 2 years ago, is a very important indication that they are going to be there. Iran looms large in West Asia. And in the past, the Russians have had good ties with Israel as well. The management of forces within Syria, in order to ensure Israel's strategic interest, security interest, was done by the Russians. So I think that Russia is not fading away. This is this kind of American celebration of something totally misguided and not connected with reality. Now, China, as you must have seen, in the context of conflict has remained very low key. Doesn't say too much, too loudly. I would say the following to you. I think China is a very significant presence in West Asian affairs. They have a vision of a larger competition with the West that straddles Eurasia and the Indian Ocean from the West Pacific right up to the Mediterranean and beyond. They have that sense and they are geared for it. They have long-term vision. They also engage, they prepare themselves for these kind of competitions. What they have done so far is, number one, the engagement between Iran and Saudi Arabia has remained in place and remains, and the Chinese continue to be involved with that. They have also attempted not to get involved with the Israel-Palestine conflict, but to call all the Palestinian factions to Beijing and to talk about the day after, which no one else has been doing. So this conversation relating to the day after is something that we would keep an eye on because it has to be. Blinken had said in his last speech, I wish he had made that speech a year ago, but then that is the guy who never got anything right, that you have, it says that it has to be a Palestine Authority. Even right-wing commentators from the West, from the US, Dennis Ross and Max Boot, both have talked about Palestine being run by Palestinians, occupied territories being run by Palestinians. Only then will the Gulf countries come in. So I think that China has done a lot in that regard. As of now, China does not get into issues where it has nothing serious to contribute. It makes these remarks in a platitudinous way, in the big picture, calling for win-win situation, we should do this, we should do that. But I think behind the scenes, when the conflict is done, and there are then diplomacy becomes resonant in the region, I think you will see China playing. There is another thing which is important to note about China, is that they say very little. They remain quite active behind the scenes. It's only when they have something significant to utter in the public domain does it emerge. So when most of the work is done, they will come out and say, this is what we have achieved. Recall here this agreement relating to China, to Saudi Arabia and Iran. None of us knew anything about it until they announced it on 10th March. So I think that, but I'm going to say this point to you. China is going to be a significant presence in West Asia. I say this with deep personal sorrow because this is our space. And many of my colleagues know that I have agitated for an Indian role for at least the last decade, completely futile, but that space is now occupied by China. I recall 10 years ago when I was to engage with Chinese scholars, we have a gathering of Gulf scholars at a conclave in Cambridge every year. So the Chinese are very active in this. And I used to talk to them about an Asian initiative to promote regional peace. And I had said China, Japan, Republic of Korea and India. And the Chinese said, we don't know the region, we don't know the language, we don't know the religion. You've been here 5,000 years, we've been here 5 years. You take the lead in this. True story, real conversation. Since then, India did, of course, nothing and has no interest in doing anything. Chinese have built up domestic capabilities of the kind that are absolutely extraordinary. They have sent hundreds of their scholars to learn Arabic. They write PhD thesis. Every major university abroad has Chinese scholars in the West. Also, every Chinese university has a center for West Asian studies. I have a friend who was earlier in Shanghai, in the Shanghai International University, is now shifted and set up the same center in Fudan University in the same town. 2 centers for West Asian studies. About 10 years ago, I met a gentleman, elderly scholar, who gave me his card which said, President, Chinese Scholars of Middle East Affairs, Association of Chinese Scholars of Middle East Affairs. This 10 years ago. So I was just curious. I said, how many members do you have? You know, like the typical arrogance of the ignorant. how many people do you have? I thought he'll say like 50 or 100. He said, it's a very small number. I'm embarrassed to say to you, I have 1,000 members. If you can find 50 scholars of West Asia, it would be difficult. I can count them on your fingers. So I would say China remains a very formidable presence. They have already consolidated themselves in terms of the economic side, the trade side, the investment, the projects that they are doing, the strategic, the kind of connectivity, the Belt and Road Initiative. Every Arab country is a member of that. This business of India, Mediterranean, Middle East, Europe, it's a complete hogwash. It's going nowhere and will not go anywhere. But this is doing actually very well. So I would say keep an eye on China. You called Egypt, Yemen and Syria MBSS projects. Small point, Syria is not an MBS project. Syria started from 2011-2012, where you had King Abdullah bin Abdulaziz. He's the one who fomented. Am I right? He's the one. MBS was not in the picture. MBS came in only in 2015, initially as as defense minister. Yemen certainly is his project. The matters relating to Yemen predate him. And they actually go back to 2011 again, when you had the Arab Spring uprisings and the fall of Ali Abdullah Saleh in 2011-20, and then the new government in 2012. MBS is impulsive as defense minister. He did what the Americans do, bomb the country, and they will be on their knees. Anyone would have said, I served in Sana'a many years ago. I was a second secretary, but also named Charge d'Affaires. So I was I used to fly the flag. I lived in Sana'a for a year and a half. And anyone would have told the Saudis, bombing the Yemenis is going to get you nowhere. You remember that earlier from 2006 to 10, the Ali Abdullah Saleh had launched 6 attacks on the on the Houthi forces in Sada province in the north. And in all of them, the Yemeni army was defeated. And therefore, this was a mistake. He thought it will be over in 3 months. That's what the Americans think. Bomb Afghanistan, 3 months, get out, and you have a friendly country. Iraq, they thought the same thing. Each of them took them 2 decades and they ran. You saw how they packed their bags and ran. That's what they do best. And that is what happened in Vietnam. That is what happened in Afghanistan. That is what happened in the case of Iraq. And it is what happened in Libya as well. So this is a disaster zone. Military force, where politics is more important, you use military force, you will get nowhere. As you know, in the case of the Palestine issue also, it's an issue that is to be negotiated, to be discussed. Like we had discussions between Yasser Arafat and Rabin all those years ago, 30 years ago. It's a discussion. You may not agree, but bombing another side is not going to get you anywhere. They're going to create a new generation of people. So I think that with regard to MBSs today, is their focus of UAE and of Saudi Arabia is really on economic development, because they want to ensure that the state order, given all the changes happening in technology and in economics and with regard to energy, that is something they must focus on. And that is what they don't want war as much. It's not the strutting. I think the Saudis and Emiratis learned their lesson in Yemen, that you're not going to win any battle there so long as these Houthis are around. You have to work with them. That's why you have a ceasefire. You have a ceasefire which has been in place for more than 2 years, and it has been successful. What did the Houthis say when they started lobbing missiles and drones on the Israelis? They simply said, do a ceasefire and increase the humanitarian assistance. You are not willing to do that, and therefore they keep on, and they are the people who are supposed to be at fault. So, clash of civilizations. It's very difficult for me to say to you whether it is the Putin and Xi Jinping and Erdogan's project or not. I don't know. I must confess, I really don't know. Where sometimes when leaders change, you have a major sea change in policy. In the case, I'm not an authority on China, and let me speak very cautiously that I can't see China the scenario changing if Xi Jinping is not there. I don't think so. I don't know. I know even less about Russia, but I don't know who will succeed him. But if you remember, Yeltsin was an American puppet, but even he finally saw the disaster his country faced and chose Putin to succeed him and told the Americans that this is what I have done. Then he became a drunken sword. Till then he was a Western ally. But then he became a drunken sword and pushed off. He chose Putin and elevated him. So I'm not sure, I can't pretend to you that this is not personality based. You could ask similar questions of some other countries also, whether a certain order is persist after the great supreme leader is no longer there. I don't know. With regard to the HTS, yes. If you remember, while HTS, the Jabhat Nusra had a lot of foreign fighters, they used to say that we are Syrians, but actually his main commander was from Chechnya, Shishani. And you had a lot of foreign fighters there. In fact, many foreign fighters came to Raqqa, with the Islamic State, and you had, Jabhat Nusra also had foreign fighters, and therefore some of those from Islamic State could possibly be stragglers and have moved into Idlib for sanctuary. I don't know enough. There's not in-depth studies available to us today to be able to tell me who all are there. But yes, the story you are referring to is about the Chinese being unhappy about these chaps from Xinjiang holding senior positions in the HTS administration. I think all of these will be coming to haunt us from time to time. It's, the Americans do these things. They play with these extremists. Imagine that they become moderate because they wear a suit and tie. And then you have a huge disaster upon your hands. Any one of us would have told the Americans, don't dabble in jihad in Afghanistan. It's going to be a disaster. And India took that position. And Americans hated us. That don't bring religion into politics. You don't know which way it will go. And that is, you remember the whole disaster of Al-Qaeda. And the literature is now available in detail how nobody applied their mind that you are mobilizing jihad, getting into the mindset of people who are frustrated, angry and bitter, and who saw the Russian only as the first enemy, and at that time too saw the Americans as their main enemy. So I would say that this is a big mistake to use these jihadi types as your allies for short-term tactical advantage and long-term strategic disaster.
Well, we've reached 8 o'clock. I see one or two hands still. Please make them brief. First you, then madam at the back, and then you. And then I might have one question to add to that.
Mr. Talmiz, you are the greatest storyteller, very impressive storytelling. My question is regarding...
The storyteller?
Teller, you yourself.
Aye.
Yeah. So my question
Fiction
is...
or non-fiction?
My question is regarding India role. We are...
Inspired by the 101 Nights.
Yeah.
Of Laila. Great stories.
My question is regarding our India role. India has been out of your discourse. So, India played a very interesting role regarding Israel and Hamas. Earlier we used to have a very distance. Now this time India was tilting towards Israel. And we had our own domestic politics also. In case of Russia and Ukraine, we tilted to Russia because we are getting 20% discount oil and it may be stopped in near future. And Ukraine was not very friendly in UN also against all the time. So how you feel about India role in this issue? Although we have a minister, he was a career diplomat. How you analyze this situation?
I think you already answered that. Can we have, Oh, you too? All right. Hi, Vijay. Please.
Good evening. My name is Namrata and I'm a labor and migration researcher on South Asia and West Asia. Thank you so much for that talk with so much heft. My question, because I grew up in Oman, and at this political moment somehow feels a little different because in all of my 30 plus years of association with the Gulf, it felt like you can't say anything political on WhatsApp. And in the case of Palestine...
You're talking about all the Gulf or Oman?
In Oman and then other Gulf countries as
Absolutely.
well. And it just feels like now is the moment where we're not discussing other things, but we can discuss Palestine. And obviously, there are a lot of people who have been on the streets, and protests have been going on in various Gulf countries, and each country has responded differently. The UAE being the typical example of shutting everything down, with the example that you gave as well. So I suppose my mulling here is, can political awakening really be siloed? Because if you talk about human rights, can political awakening be siloed? So because if you start to talk about democracy and human rights in one context, you'll start to ask it of your own. So when that begins to happen more, it's not that these things haven't happened in the Gulf, but once that happens more in the Khalij, in the Gulf, what are the implications for the wider region if that gains traction, including Syria? And then what of this reconstruction that we're speaking of?
Okay. The big problem,
Vichitra?
Acha, one more.
I think one more.
Mine is a different question. How far will Israel go around nibbling away the Syrian territory? Will there ever be a reaction from the Syrian leadership?
Okay, finished? Yours. Burning question? Do you have a burning question, or has it been covered by anyone else? All right, please.
Yeah, sir.
Microphone.
Okay. My name is Kartar
Short
Kapoor.
question.
I'm a student of comparative studies in the evolution of history, because you've been talking about history. I'll go very fast because he wouldn't allow me to. He always say brief. Sir, you say jihadi movement is over. So, no sir, it has just begun. Jihadi movement is over. No sir, it has just begun. This is just a trailer. The picture is far away. There is a civilization conflict, and then you see the jihad over there. Now next is, do Islamic world consider Assad a Muslim? You have never clarified that. Islamic world do not consider Assad a Muslim. This is one. This is point to be noted.
Okay, I think
Sir, please give me.
it's past 8 o'clock.
I'll pass. Very fast. No word about Saddam or Baath party. So important. And my last
Where
word.
should I have brought Saddam and Baath?
Baath party, sir.
Where should I have brought it?
So this has not been mentioned anywhere. It's not been mentioned. Ignore. Right? My last, because
I think
it's
too much. Four questions is too much.
Last one,
please,
sir. Last one.
Stop it.
Sir, last one. Please, last one. When
It
two
won't be
elephants make love or war, it is the grass that suffer. People have to suffer. During this evolution and civilization conflict, people are going to suffer. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. With regard to West Asia, the speaker frequently offends one section of the audience or the other. There is no way you can please everybody because there are passions in the picture. A few days ago, I was at a certain forum, and I had not this presentation, but generally about West Asia. And unknown to me, there was a gentleman who didn't say anything to me from the audience, but in the next session, which was about India and the West, he suggested that some parts of the previous presentation had been anti-Semitic. And I thought to myself, if that is the worst you can say about me, then I'm all right. Because there is no way any Indian or any Muslim can be anti-Semitic. Because the prophets of the Old Testament, whom the Jews revere, are also revered by all Muslims. So if I criticize Israel, it can never make me anti-Semitic. There is deep respect in the heart of all of us. And of course, nurtured in the Indian ethos, we respect all faiths. There is no question of anyone rubbishing somebody else's faith. So this frequent use of the term anti-Semitic serves no useful purpose. But now coming to the Gulf, I will offense number one. All Gulf states are authoritarian. All of them are surveillance states. They watch everything that you do, every message, every email, every utterance. Your internet activity is monitored. They are a very accommodative region, state order, so long as you don't get into politics, royal family and religion. Don't get into that. Otherwise, you are fine. Make money, behave yourself, and everything will be good for you. So that will remain. Your hint was, will any of this change? I don't see any prospect of that changing just yet. You see, as a student of West Asia, my region is so volatile and goes through such major changes and convulsions that I say any analysis that I do, the long term is 5 years. The short term is 1 year, the medium term is 2 to 3 years, the long term is 5 years. Therefore, anything that I say is for the next 5 years. Anything beyond that will be influenced by what happens in the next first 5 years, and then you go. If I were to ever utter a remark in public saying, 20 saal mein ye hone wala hai, then I should be really executed. Because that is not possible. So in the 5-year period that I am looking at, or we are looking at, I must confess to you that I don't see the order changing in any shape or form. The order is benign and accommodative to the extent that you don't challenge it. The minute you challenge it, then the coercive role of the state order, as opposed to the cooperative role, emerges. So the male fist, and it's harsh. Today the kingdom has more than 50,000 political prisoners, it is said. It is said, I don't know. Books. And there are 50,000 Saudis in exile as political exiles. It is said. This was not the case earlier, but some of the issues have got sharpened over a period of time. So, for the time being, I think we are likely to see this. The resonance of Islam has reduced quite significantly, and I don't think any state order today upholds Islam like Saudi Arabia used to do, and indeed is now talking the language of nationalism. Every Gulf country now resonates with nationalism and is seeking to co-opt not us but the next generation, young people, and make them partners in the national endeavor rather, because they know that the older people are incorrigible. So you have to go to the next people and co-opt them with the promise of partnership, of technology, the best education. And I am told, I have not been to the kingdom over 10 years, I am told that it has been successful in Saudi Arabia. And young people are quite comfortable. Not everyone desperately wants to be involved with politics. It's surprising for an Indian because the Indian lives and breathes politics. But in their case, they have a full life with absent politics. And that is where they have shaped themselves. Say, for example, you lived in Oman. It's one of the most pleasant places to stay in. They love you. They love Indians. They love all our Bollywood films. And they speak Hindi, many of them. So the Indians are respected. Some of them have nationality. What more do you want? Leave the royal family to its own devices. Let the Omanis take care of it. We are all right. Now, how far will Israel go in terms of territory? You see, there is part of the messianic tradition in Israel is the idea of Greater Israel or Eretz Israel. That Israel is a country that has no constitution because the first paragraph of a constitution defines your territory. Israel has no such interest. Therefore, they live through basic laws, no constitution. And from time to time, particularly when Israel has been remarkably successful, claims, ever extravagant claims to territory are made by different people. And you find if you go to the internet and you say Greater Israel or Eretz Israel, you will find numerous maps. And the Israelis themselves feed us these maps. Just a few days ago, in this month itself, the Foreign Office published a map reminding us that there was an Israeli empire that went of this. Earlier when I was in the region, they used to say anywhere where a Old Testament prophet went can be legally claimed as part of the state of Israel. I don't think they are going too far in this. They may say all these things, and some of their zealots may make some extraordinarily aggressive claims, but I think that Israel's focus today is the management of the occupied territories. And it's not going well, because you see this occupied West Bank, though about half of it is with settlement, 700,000 settlers, it has 3.6 million Palestinians. And in Gaza, you have 2.3 million Palestinians. You have a very large number of Palestinians in East Jerusalem. And then you have the people who are citizens of Israel. The non-Jewish population of Israel and the occupied territories and the Jewish population of Israel, they are today even. 7 million, roughly 7 million. We don't know 7 million. Now, what do you do with this? You can say theoretically, oh, these wretched Palestinians should just go away. Just go away. Go away. Disappear. I'll make your life miserable. You go to Jordan and make your home there. Or these Gaza people should go to Sinai and make their people there. And a lot of very fevered stories have been written. People have written, we'll fund you. Cairo has got so many million empty homes. For about $10 billion, we can buy those homes and send these 2.3 million people of Gaza to those homes. Or if that is not possible, Egypt doesn't, let's make a tent city in Sinai. Get rid of these 2.3 million and put the Jews back. So all these are fevered. I don't think that where Israel, I have argued that Israel doesn't have a long-term perception. Even with regard to the Gaza war, you found numerous people saying that Israel has no strategy. Other than mass murder, there is no strategy. Biden has said this is quoted in War, saying that you have no strategy. So, therefore, I believe that Israel lives from conflict to conflict. That you go to this conflict, then you go to the next one, but don't address the issues ever, ever, ever. The last time was the Oslo Accord, and then Rabin got assassinated. I don't count the Clinton initiative at Camp David too seriously. That was a loser looking to embellish his record after the enthusiasm with which he encountered Lewinsky. So I don't think that it mattered. Though, of course, the entire discourse on that is that it was Palestinian failure. But that is not the case, because the maximum that Ehud Barak could offer Yasser Arafat was not even minimally acceptable. The three issues of Palestine sovereignty, of Jerusalem as the capital, East Jerusalem as the capital, and the return of refugees, not one of them he was able to talk about and concede. So I think that there is a rhetoric and there is a reality, but unfortunately there is no political capacity within Israel today to address this issue of Palestinian aspirations. Every literature, I wrote an article recently for Frontline, which may appear in 10 days, where every person I read, even hard right-wing people from the United States, and Blinken himself, I've quoted all of them say that you must address the Palestinian issue, address the Palestinian issue, go for the two-state solution. And the Israelis just shrugged their heads and go away, you are idiots, you don't know anything that's happening here. Assad is a Muslim. He's an Alawi. He was given a fatwa by an Ayatollah saying that the Alawi are very close to the 12er Shia. That was the fatwa, on the basis of which Hafez al-Assad could stand for elections. The Syrian constitution in 1970 provided that the head of state should be a Muslim. So the doubt arose as to who are the Alawi. So the Alawi first, very rightly, sensibly, asked to be declared Sunni, and they went to al-Azhar. And al-Azhar said they don't know, because their tenets are secret. Their tenets are secret. Do recall here that West Asia is full of such esoteric groups whose faith is not known to all of us outsiders. They are not part of mainstream. There is an Alawi group in Turkey. There is, of course, the Druze that we know. So Alawi, their tenets are secret. So he went to Qom. And Qom refused to declare him a Shia. So he was having serious issues about his future. And he finally got this Ayatollah to declare him that Alawi tenets are close to 12er Shia. That is why he was able to stand, and the Alawi people are recognized as Muslims. Right? I think we should accept it as that. With regard to the Baath, yes, you are right to raise this issue in the context of Iraq. Baathism now is not resonant either in Iraq or in Syria. It was a movement that was, in a political context, resonant in the 70s and 80s, and I don't see any. They used to talk. I lived in Baghdad, and they used to talk about the tenets: Wahada, Hurriya, Ishtarakiya, unity, freedom, and socialism. These were the three tenets of Baathism, and they remain on my tongue because we used to hear that all the time. And that they used to say these things, that it was a very secular movement and used to use the tenets of socialism, and therefore they were very comfortable with the Eastern Bloc at that time. But they were authoritarian rulers, and some of the harshest authoritarian rulers. So, Baath or no Baath, you still had the iron hand. I think we should.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I think, that was really an extraordinary exposition on West Asia.
Storytelling.
Great storytelling, but not fiction. Clearly non-fiction.
That was a compliment, sir.
Yes, yes. But really extra, and it's impossible to even to try and recap this amazingly rich tapestry that covered practically every single thread and current of what's been happening in West Asia, and then also extrapolating that to the kind of international global dimension with Russia, China, the clash of civilizations, the West and the US in particular. I'd like to just pick up one thread, because it was perhaps one of the most hopeful and the most novel that I found, which was, your prediction or your imagination that perhaps the future of Israel itself could be different and could be shaped by the youth of Israel. And actually today, when we look at the world, the Palestinian cause more or less crippled practically everywhere in the Arab and Islamic world.
Yeah, I've got the picture there.
Yes, as you yourself said. And the idea of Palestine perhaps being most alive in American universities and Western capitals who are far away from the theater of action and probably can do very little about it, this kind of mirroring of Israeli youth and, let's say, Western youth and perhaps also Islamic youth could well happen. And, as you said, you cannot think in the long term beyond 5 years. I'm not predicting this as something that could happen in 5 years. But, to the big question that I had in my mind, is the Palestinian cause dead? Is the Palestinian cause dead?
Okay,
you have given a very clear and emphatic.
Anyone who says the Palestinian cause is dead is doomed to failure.
Yeah.
They have said this many times. Israel pushes that.
Yeah.
Israel had convinced the Americans with all the CIA activities and all the diplomats. They are convinced by the Americans by the Israelis of all the wrong things.
Right.
God knows why. So the Israelis convince them the Palestinian cause is over, and these Arabs are happy to normalize relations with us.
Correct.
And you get into disaster zones all the time. You do stupid things and you get into disaster zones.
Sort of self.
So I don't think Palestinian cause remains resonant. What I have seen now is that many of the Arab fence-sitters, particularly Saudi Arabia, are now realize that you have to remain sensitive to this. And hopefully that is where things will go forward. We don't know. I mean, let's not. Next 5 years, I think there is constant violence, absence of violence. These Americans are being encouraged again by the Israelis to normalize, that they can normalize ties with Saudi Arabia without doing anything for the Palestinians. I don't think it's going anywhere.
And, just to support that, I think one of the sort of striking images that came out of the ceasefire yesterday was just the visibility of Hamas fighters once again back on the street after 15 months of punishment.
All of us would have known this.
Yes.
It is not a shock for us. But the thing is, I want to leave one piquant thought. Donald Trump.
Yes.
Donald Trump, look at the thing. So far, Israel has manipulated US politics on the basis of using the Republicans against the Democrats. He undermined Obama and he undermined Biden. He did that. You can't undermine a Republican president. Now, all eyes are on Donald Trump and everyone is an expert on him and has things to say about him. I see him as a right-wing president whose impulses are towards peace and deal-making. He doesn't like war. So peace and deal-making. And he thinks he's a great deal-maker. Therefore, I would argue, you can argue this, you can be proven wrong tomorrow, and all of us can be proven wrong anytime. We are not prophets. He could do a deal with Iran, I think.
Maybe.
And who knows, he could do a deal on Palestine. After all, he did something. At that time, he was influenced by Netanyahu, Kushner, and all those hard right-wing Jewish people around him, and also encouraged by the Christian evangelists. But I think that
he did a deal. He did a deal with the Taliban as well.
Huh?
He did a deal with the Taliban as well.
And with North Korea, you remember his bonhomie with the North Korean leader, they loved each other. So all of this, you never know with him. I mean, if there is one American president who can actually deliver, is not a democratic president like Jimmy Carter, is actually a hard right-wing.
Incidentally, this was a
like
thought
Reagan
that was,
could do with the Cold War, with the Russians.
This was a thought that was echoed by John Galloway as well, incidentally. So I'll end. I really need to only thank a number of people. Of course, the president of the Center for Policy Research, the IIC as a whole, the staff of our communications team, the staff of the IIC that has provided us the apparatus for and the hall and everything else for today's event, and to all of you, to the president of the board of the Center for Policy Research, Meenakshi Gopinath, who slipped in quietly just after the beginning, and of course a very distinguished audience. Thank you all for listening, and thank you for your questions, and let's hope for the next event in the near future. Good day.